What does it mean to be English to you?
No, I didn't actually answer your question, of course, did I? Well, one of your questions, which was that. And to be honest, I would quite like to avoid answering that, because it's an existential thing. It's shades. It's not absolutes. It's not you are this and you aren't that. It's, you're more this type of thing. And I mean, briefly in the article, I did refer to Kate Fox, her books, Watching the English. So she refers to things like humour, moderation, hypocrisy, which I quite like. But that's closely linked to our form of politeness. You're a hypocrite in order not to cause trouble, which I think is in some ways quite a reasonable thing to do. But I think it's closely related to forms of politeness, and not causing trouble. Not looking to cause people trouble, and moderation. Anyway, sorry. I think I can see you busting to interrupt.
No,
maybe.
No, I certainly wasn't. I was trying to hang on to my thought. Maybe I've just proved the point about Englishness there, the politeness. No, of course, I wasn't trying to jump in. I was reading Robert Toombs' book, the English and Their History. It's this big 1,000-page history book.
Yeah, I read it.
And it is a very good book, isn't it? And I suppose the way he characterizes it, he does it within the context of what it means to be part of a nation. And his view is that to have a national identity is quite a modern conception for most countries, because, Germany, for example, was lots of princely states for a very long time until it became a unified country in the 19th century. And so any idea of Germanness as a nation is a very new concept, he said. But England, he doesn't really apply that to, because it's more ancient. From the 8th century, people were talking about the English people, whether it was Bede or whether it was the Anglo-Saxon kings. And so he talks about England and Englishness first beginning as an idea before it became a unified kingdom all those years ago, 1,200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And then it was a country, and then over time it was a people, and the culture obviously builds around that. And he said, you can see the seeds of a country and its monuments and its books and its institutions and its symbols. And I guess this is why sometimes I bridle in modernity at the changing of things like the English canon to try and modernize it, because it all hangs on everything that we just spoke about. And everything that we just spoke about, when you go back to origin stories, it was so closely bound up with even the Christian religion, which I know you mentioned within that. And many of the things that are seeking to displace whatever it is that's within our canon, the things that we see as being particularly English, don't come from that same root. And I suppose looking at it in this way, it's not to say that actually it's about having a genetic link. It's about this cultural kinship, being a part of something and taking part in it, which I suppose is more of a civic nationalist idea than an ethno-nationalist idea, which obviously everyone gets worried about, right?
Definitely, it's really interesting in that way. And in reflecting on this, sometimes I've thought that, there are aspects of Englishness to other countries as well, to America. But I think we've seen a similar type process, obviously, to that we've seen here, of the kind of the reduction in presence of a positive version of Englishness over there. For example, with the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And I've been reading about the Korean War, lately, and it's remarkable when you come across all the names of these generals. Virtually all of them have English names. And it struck me as quite unusual for what America is now. And, the WASPs have kind of almost like died away from public life, especially in the Democratic Party. I mean, they're kind of effectively, the out-group, I think, to the Democratic Party. But also I was reflecting on India. When I went to India when I was like 18 or 19, which was quite a few years ago, believe it or not. And the traces of Englishness were still quite strong there. You know, you could say of empire, but I'd say it was more of a sensibility. And the way, you know, the newspapers, they were very sort of old English in a sense. And people used to come up to me on trains and find out I was English and just share a kind of a similar culture, you know, with me. And I haven't been to India since, but I do get the impression that at least sort of there being a positive attachment to Englishness has, at least in public life, has almost died out. You know, now it's something to be very hostile to. You know,
why do you think it is so controversial to speak of being English, or why do you think there is hostility to Englishness?
God, that's a big question. I mean, obviously, there's the history. I mean, colonialism, you know, genuinely have had negative effects all over the world. And not that it's all negative, but it did. And there's understandably a lot of resentment about that, and also sort of judgment and, you know, people knowing some of the history. I don't have any problem with that at all. But obviously there's a rocket being put under that. And now it's become a proper visceral hostility and an institutional and a dogmatic hostility. And talking about causation, though, and it's very difficult the way these things always kind of come with the wind, don't they? They come and go with the wind, with fashion. And I'm hoping it does and that they go away. You know, that we're no longer the great enemy of the world, the new Nazis. But I think, especially in this country, it obviously has a lot to do with immigration and the politicization of identity, especially by the left. And the way they allocate favoured groups, you know, which are non-white, which are immigrants, you know, are by definition not the ethnic English, at least. So it's associating Englishness and English people who identify with English, at least in an implicitly negative way, because they're not on the positive group. And I think this just feeds through a kind of existential logic into the way people think about it. And I think we're now properly seeing the consequences of decades of this, plus lots more immigration, lots more politicization, lots more interest in that politicization. And since there are far more people of immigrant backgrounds, it pays for the left, especially, a lot more to politicize those groups as being dependent on them. It's like, you know, you're really at risk from these awful people. We will protect you. So I think that's what's going on in the way obviously, I mean, traditionally the liberal left more widely is in the institutions. You know, traditionally conservatives are too busy either, you know, conserving things or, you know, making money. So in the state and in, you know, artistic institutions, creative institutions, all the rest of it, you know, traditionally you've had, you know, a large, you know, liberal left presence, but that's kind of lost its sense of tolerance now. I mean, obviously it still talks about tolerance, but it's changed the meaning of tolerance to mean, you know, you don't interfere with what I like. You know, you don't oppose anything that we like and the people that we protect. So I mean, that's maybe a bit of a long-winded attempt at an explanation, but I think that's basically got there. It's a group of things going together and you know, kind of like I say, an existential logic working through.
I've heard people talk about the institutional focus on expunging things like Englishness from the record. And lots of people have proffered different reasons for this. And one of the most recent cases which highlights it is the erasure of the word and the period Anglo-Saxon from the academic record. So North American educational institutions have been behind this, where they're trying to make the case that Anglo-Saxons were never really a people, and it was something that we just came up with post hoc, and that they should now be referred to as the early English period. And English and British academic institutions have now taken this on, and people have already started to refer to it. I noticed it with a recent podcast guest, and I didn't notice it at the time. But as we spoke about earlier, is Anglo-Saxons were a people. We had kings who talked about being the kings of the Anglo-Saxons. So it's not that it was just made up post hoc. So this institutional bias, I suppose, you're right, people can feel it. They might not know all of the academic background to it all, but they know there's a sense of taking away. And I guess the question is what's going to come of that existential despair that you talk about? Because presumably if lots of people are feeling it and they don't have the outlet for it, then that's a bit of a problem. We don't want people to feel like they can't partake in the liberal political democracy that we're supposed to have. And let's linger on the liberalism bit for a moment, because you've talked a little bit about multiculturalism, immigration, and these things being a pressure point on Englishness. I heard Carl Benjamin, also known as Sargon of Akkad, on the Andrew Gold Heretics podcast recently, talk about how liberalism as a governing philosophy was the codification of English culture, and then it was exported on a mass scale. It became the governing philosophy, this idea of let's have some neutrality over how we try and govern things and be very indifferent and tolerant. But that seems to me like it's suppressed Englishness further, along with all the other things.